All right. So, as per anyone who knows me today, I exude this persona of buffoonery and general memery. But it took me a long time to get to where I am now, and I think I only really reached that point of being like, this is who I am as of last year. Now, I'm someone who's always struggled with anxiety, insecurities, self confidence, the whole shebang. And this one simple trick is how I became more comfortable with myself. That trick, fake it. Pretend like you know what you're doing. Does it look like I know what I'm talking about right now? Does it look like I know what I'm doing? Do I appear confident? Heck no, I'm nervous presenting alongside people way more successful than me, but I'm feigning this. So how am I doing it? I'm going to build this from the ground up, from the first sight to the first impression to true love. I had a problem in high school where I would only wear hoodies and track pants because they were comfortable. But as soon as I started stepping out of my comfort zone from fashion, I felt more confident in myself. I was like, yeah, look at me because I look good today. You may notice I look pretty dapper right now, which brings me to my first point, first sight. People say not to judge a book by its cover, but we all do it subconsciously. We all make assumptions about people before we even talk to them. You see a person walking down the streets of busy downtown Halifax in a full suit and holding a briefcase. You think, man, they have their life together. They're an important businessman who don't play around. You search up businessman on Google Images and there's a glaring similarity. Have you ever noticed how you feel more powerful in a full suit? You just feel more official because you perceive others that look like that as more powerful. Well, cut to 4 years ago. I'm walking around downtown Toronto in a full suit holding a briefcase of notes coming out of a debate tournament, thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I made the realization of, I'm wearing a suit, I'm holding a briefcase, maybe everyone else feels the same. Maybe they don't know what they're doing and they're just pretending as well. Maybe they're pretending just as much as I am. So the key point here is don't be intimidated by people in suits. Remember that everyone's just a human being trying to navigate this crazy life as well. Don't be intimidated by others' appearances, because that shows a lack of confidence. Imagine them as not knowing what they're doing either. They seem more approachable, easier to talk to, and as a result, you seem more confident. So great, you're confident. Well, not quite. Maybe if you're a statue, but we're not done yet. You can be dressed to the nines and still exude nervousness and a lack of confidence. So let's cut to another story. In a previous job, I ran out of paper, and usually we asked the supervisors for more paper, but they were all busy with more important things. So I thought to myself, I know where the keys are, I know where the extra paper is. I don't want to interrupt them, so I'll just go get it myself. So I walked into the office, grabbed the keys, unlocked the doors to the main offices, walked in, grabbed the paper, walked out, returned the keys, and no one questioned anything. I pretended like I was supposed to be there, and no one questioned it, because I looked confident. I walked straight, I looked forward, I minimized pauses, I had my eyes forward, my chin up, my back straight, my shoulders back and down. I had an almost unimpressed emotion, like it was just a regular occurrence for me, and no one questioned it. And this isn't just a purely psychological thing either. Studies have shown that posture can actually affect mood. It can raise testosterone and lower cortisol, making you physically feel more confident. So now you appear confident, so long as no one interacts with you, though the whole facade can still fall apart if someone engages in a conversation. You've heard the common, don't stutter, don't use ums, which, while true, isn't enough to appear fully confident. Your speech gate determines how people interpret you. If you're fast and excited, you know what you're talking about, but you're also just a generally excitable person. If you know what you're talking about, this can exude so much confidence. But it's dangerous, because the more you talk, the more likely you are to screw up. If you want to play it safe, be deliberate with what you say. Be short and to the point, don't provide unnecessary info, and try to be on the listening end. Speak smoothly, not necessarily fast or slow, but a consistent, deliberate pace. Embrace the dramatic pauses. Another tip is to wait until after someone finishes and just wait a little bit. It shows both that you're listening and it creates tension, giving you the listening position. A popular trick of therapists is they forcibly create awkward tension by not saying anything. Your mind wants you to fill the gap, and so you speak unprompted. By waiting that tiny bit, but not too long to make it awkward, you can sometimes prompt more talk from them, keeping you on the listening end. If you speak confidently and listen actively, people will generally believe anything you say, and that's why I run a successful cult. In summary, fake it till you make it actually works. If you can feign confidence successfully, you can mentally become more confident going forward. And that was the defining step in becoming who I am today, realizing that confidence is just a state of mind that you can choose to put yourself in. If you believe in yourself, you can accomplish anything. Thank you for listening. 4.0.
Okay. Hi guys, how's everyone doing? Good, cool. So unfortunately with my TED Talk here, I don't have a fancy presentation like Tyler did. But today I'll be talking, like he said, about something called the threshold step. So everybody has these different stages that they go through in their life. So high school, university, moving out, getting a real job, and then way down the line having kids. Each stage is different for each person, of course, but there are common themes that run through everybody's life. And each stage can be a monumental thing for a person. So take university, for example. Some people, that means moving away from home, away from your family, into a new city, maybe a new environment, meeting new people, new routines. So that's a pretty big deal, right? But today I'm going to focus not on the stages in people's lives, but the space between these stages. So these steps from stage to stage are among the biggest and most important things in people's lives. And it's not the act of being at university, for example, that's difficult. It's just the act of taking the first step. So literally the step over the threshold of your front door. So that's why this concept is called the threshold step. This idea is important because when we break down what is actually the most difficult for us, what really scares us, then we figure out how to surpass and overcome these fears. So if we continue using the theme of university, it's easy to say that no one is scared of their friends, right? But for example, maybe you feel anxious about meeting new people who could one day become your best friends. So this is your threshold step. This is what's holding you back. And this is what you need to be able to figure out how to confidently step past. So for me, I passed through the classic stages of high school, moving away to university, I'm from Ontario, to making friends. And my biggest threshold step for me may have been last semester. I went to Australia for a semester abroad. And not only was I going to school in another country, another continent, another time zone even, I was doing it all alone. And so, yes, I was flying to meet Mitch, one of my friends, to travel with him before school started. But I had to get there first. And when I woke up that first morning when I was leaving, I was frightened. And that's not just the classic, like, ooh, I'm nervous. It was like, I was honestly terrified about leaving. And the most difficult part for me was not, packing my bags or finding the gate where my flight was. It was literally stepping out of the front door and getting into the car. That was the hardest part. And then I did it again when Mitch and I had finished our amazing trip. I had to get to school, go there, meet new people, all that kind of stuff. And again, taking the first step was always the most difficult, but it's always the most rewarding as well. So if we take the experiences we have and then we start looking forwards, there are basically three major things we can do to deal with and then overcome these threshold steps that we have. So the first thing is if we look back on our life and see where we had the largest threshold steps. So university, moving out, getting a job, whatever something that was difficult and scared you, but like really scared you. So the first thing is to identify those. Number two is taking those experiences and memories and steps and looking ahead to where there may be new potential threshold steps further down the line. So that could be moving cities, maybe getting another degree after your undergrad, maybe starting a family down the road. And by looking ahead to these distant threshold steps, you can better prepare yourself for when they do actually arrive. And then you have the best way that you already know to surpass these. And number three may be the most important, in my opinion. Number three is looking past yourself and your hardships, because number three is about noticing other people's threshold steps and helping do what you can to relieve some of the burdens on those people. So maybe you just started a job 6 months ago, for example, but the most recent hire is having some trouble adjusting to the workplace. Or maybe someone just moved in down the block and are trying to meet new friends. And this is an example we all know pretty well. Someone is new to university, maybe they just came into first year, and they decide that they want to join a club or a society or something like that. And then they decide to join PHIx, because all of us were those kids at one point, right? We were those scared newcomers who really had no idea what was going on or what they were doing there. And our job is to be the kind of person that will help others overcome their threshold steps that they're having trouble with. And that's because doing anything exciting takes guts. Doing anything worth doing at all takes guts. And doing something that you'll remember for the rest of your life takes guts. So the next time you find yourself at one of these threshold steps, don't just think about it and go the other way. Walk right past it into the new stage of your life. Embrace it. Because once it's done, it's done. You've done it. Congrats. You've finished the hardest part. And don't second guess yourself, because I promise it will be worth doing whatever you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Great. I'm really looking forward to the rest of tonight. I'm so glad we did this. All right, and next up is Randy with a presentation about a misfit finds his tribe.
Thanks, brothers. I appreciate it. This is super exciting. I got to tell you, when I was an undergraduate, I imagine Donald, when you were an undergraduate as well, something like this wasn't even in, the landscape of what we could do, what was a possibility. And it's really interesting because quite literally, as I've listened to the first two presentations, my first thought was, wow, we've actually taken the idea of a literary exercise and turned it into something that is much broader, much more important, and much more unifying. Literally, we're being PHIs in a literal sense. And that's kind of where I found my tribe when I joined Phi Delta Theta. So if you can imagine, some of you weren't even born, but all the way back to, and Donald's gonna laugh at this, but all the way back to 1998 in what was then a newly renovated 1378 Seymour Street. Literally, we had just finished rebuilding the place after years and years of neglect. Donald and many of the other alumni came together, did a major capital campaign, and tore the thing back to its studs, rebuilt it. I know that happened again with Matt Welsh and some of the work that he did in recent years. But here I was joining this group of guys. Let me tell you about Nova Scotia Alpha in 1998. Phi Delta Theta had just adopted the alcohol-free housing policy. And for many of our brethren, that was enough. They didn't want to be members and decided that that was it. So I joined a chapter as part of a pledge class of 4 men that took our chapter, Nova Scotia Alpha, from 8 guys to 12. So think about the numbers that you guys are actually managing with now. But we started that back then with literally 12 of us. And I came to Halifax and literally I was this goofy little, 5'4" brown kid who had never been to Nova Scotia ever, had no friends, no family, no connection. I literally don't even know exactly what brought me to Dalhousie anymore, but that's where I ended up. And so how did I go? And I'll tell you, the first thing, if you ask any of my pledge brothers, any of the other PHIs, then one of the things they're going to say about me when they first met me was, and I loved this presentation to begin things, was I was very much in my fake it till you make it phase, right? They actually would say that I wasn't necessarily authentic. They knew that I always seemed like I was trying to put on a show, that I was always trying to understand what the next thing was. And you know what? They were absolutely right. I hadn't figured out how to be authentic, how to be, the guy I am now. And hopefully I'm far more authentic. And here's the thing about being a misfit. It's going to happen over and over and over and over again. So if you can imagine 4 years later, after, my 4 years as an undergraduate, I get hired by Phi Delta Theta General Headquarters, and I go down to the States. Again, this is now 2002, a year before the Twin Towers fell in New York. Every time I walked into an airport, you can imagine what life was like for me. And I'm about to go work in the States, visiting university campuses across the northeastern United States. Let me tell you, you're going to be a misfit every couple of years, and that's the whole cycle. So how did I find my tribe? How do I keep finding my tribe? Well, let's talk about the idea of tribes in the first place. What is a tribe? Most people think about tribes as, groups of belonging, but I'm actually going to argue that it's something completely different. Tribes are about shared stories, shared experiences, the things that we experience with each other. I guarantee you that there are things that, that Donald experienced that I didn't, but also things that Donald experienced that I did, that helps us connect over the 10, 15, maybe 20 years that separate us from our undergraduate to the, to the experiences that you have that, separate us, between the 10, 20 years between your undergraduate experience and mine, that make us PHIs. Because tribes are about storytelling. They're about the things that we share with each other, because in those stories, there's a commonality. There's always going to be a commonality. And that's the thing that we're constantly looking for. When you go out into the workforce, most of you are going to be interviewing in the next couple of years, and you're going to deal with these, excuse my language, annoying as bleep, interviews of, tell me about a time when. Literally, all you're being asked is, hey, you know what? Tell me a story about your experience, about how you experienced something that might relate to us. Because if you want to join our tribe, and our tribe is a tribe that's based on work, then we need to know that you have a similar story, or at least understand stories the way that we do. Tribes help us navigate a world that's too big for us to understand, and they help us act on that world by helping us form a picture in our head of how we might act. And we have a bunch of them. And so as a lifelong misfit, I'll tell you, there's something to be gained in that. And that takes us to the second presentation, which again I loved, this idea of the threshold. And I remember standing outside the door of 1378 Seymour before I walked in for the first time, thinking, what the hell am I doing? Right? And so many of you have probably had that experience, or know somebody that had that experience. And every single one of you is, even while we're recruiting virtually, going to talk to somebody that's having that experience. There's 1,000 things that I think I understand about fraternalism, but I'm standing at this doorstep and I don't know if I want to cross that threshold. And what's going to make me cross it? I'll tell you, the most important thing that you can do as a member of, in your own misfit way, is actually embrace exactly that. Hey, you know what? I stood at that threshold too. So rather than me inviting you in, I'm going to step out the door and walk in with you, right? Let's do it together. And that was one of the things that I learned after 4 years of being an undergraduate PHI. It was the weirdest thing. Learning how to ask for help was the most important thing I ever learned. And it's how I begin to find my tribe. And I came away after my years with Phi Delta with 3 really important principles, and they're related to the cardinal principles, but 3 principles that still manage my life. I manage my life today. First one is seek out your purpose. And purpose is broader than just, some easy phrase that, sounds like make more money in the end, which is how a lot of purpose statements sound like. It's about that one thing that you do. Mine is I solve human puzzles, right? I base my entire life, my entire career, and all my relationships on that one thing. Everything's because I'm so passionate about puzzles. That's what everything is for me. And I treat life that way, and it's how I've found success. Second principle, and this one again, being a member of a fraternity, for those of you who are officers, those of you who have had to deal with judicial boards, for those of you who have done a run by higher education, here's a big one for you. Simplicity by nature is complex. It's incredibly difficult. It takes a ton of work to take something really, really complicated and make it sound easy. I know this because I spent my years as a consultant not only talking to other PHIs, but talking to people outside about fraternalism and trying to help people understand that the idea of quote unquote buying your friends is not really all that uncommon in everything you do in the world. Anytime you've gone out to the bar and bought somebody a pint that you didn't know and struck up a conversation, hey, guess what? You bought a friend, right? There's more to it than meets the eye. But the complexity of all of that takes a lot of time and a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting to be able to manage. And the last thing, about how I sort of went, how as a misfit I, came to be accepted by and still live Phi Delta Theta in my life, is thinking about interest versus position. One of the things that being a Phi taught me was, hey, look, we all got different ways of approaching this, but everybody's trying to row the boat in the same direction. So how do I cut out all the noise and focus on the signal? What's the one thing somebody's trying to tell me about who they are, who they want to be, and how they want to be in the world? You do these three things, and if you take a look very carefully, all of these three things are the exact things that are laid out by our ritual. Why we look to Miami University, why we do different things, why we have different symbols and icons in our room. That's what they're there for, is to help us try to nail these principles down and make those cardinal principles our own. So, in conclusion, being a misfit is probably the best thing you can be. The question is how much are you going to embrace your inner misfit to make the world your own? Thanks.
Another great presentation. Thank you so much, Randy. All right, up next, we've got Sebastian with a presentation about strength in weakness.
Hey guys, I skipped over Josh Neufeld. He says hello, that he's still listening in. He just has a meeting right now. But yeah, I decided to tackle the topic of self-awareness, finding strength in weakness. So weakness, we all have it. It's part of being human. You may not know it yet, but through attending Dalhousie University and even Phi Delta, you're going to find weaknesses and trials that you'll have to overcome. As for me, I unfortunately had to overcome these weaknesses at a young age, and I had to tackle mental, physical, and spiritual weaknesses. And I still sometimes struggle with these in third year of uni. So before a series of certain events, I'm sure a few of you already know what it is, I considered myself book smart. I was very athletic in some areas, but I was definitely the type to be worried about how I looked, always worried about what other people thought about me. So when I went to a summer camp in Kingston in 2014 for sailing, I definitely tried hiding a lot of these weaknesses, faking it till I made sense. I wanted to show people that I was, the tough, cool kid. Yet, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but as a result of that, that almost got me killed. See, for a lot of you who haven't gone sailing before, you'll know that I can get pretty rough. And you'll get bruised up, banged up, lots of cuts. And I thought I was definitely getting a lot of these injuries, a lot more so than what I should have been getting. And I just thought that it made me hardcore at sailing, I was like ready to face those guys in the Olympics. But no, that wasn't the case. I remember the day very clearly. It was at 3 a.m. These two big, scary officers woke me up at 3 a.m. and they were like in full combat gear. I think I have a picture of one of them actually. Let me pull it up for you guys. I'm surprised I found it. It was very accurate. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's kind of what the officer looked like. But 3 a.m. woke me up. They told me, come, we have to take you to the hospital. And I wasn't really expecting anything to happen. I had no idea what was going to happen or how much my life was about to change in an instant. So on August 9th, 2014, at 4 a.m., I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is cancer, at the age of 14. And when you get diagnosed with cancer, you have two options. One of them is you battle cancer with all your willpower, making the most of it, or the other one is to just give up and let cancer win the fight. In life, you may never know what destiny takes you, and even what to expect when the doctor wants to tell you die from this, or you'll have a chance to fight. In my case, it was my dad who came in to tell me that I had cancer. They caught the leukemia just in time because it's already spread throughout my whole body, and 1 or 2 days left, I would have been dead. I would have dropped dead. But my dad came in, told me I had cancer, and a voice inside my head kept telling me that I was going to live through this battle of cancer. I believe to this day that it was God talking to me, but it was just clear as day, you are going to live. And I kind of use that as motivation. But I did start out weak. When I was starting chemotherapy, you could say my weaknesses got enforced in a way. Since I was already, all of a sudden, I could barely eat and barely move my body. I'm staying in bed for 1 month receiving chemotherapy. I followed in a way because um, they told me I wasn't allowed to go back to camp and see all my friends. So I was just kind of moping around for a bit. Additionally, my cheeks got very swollen, and I started to get a very, very bad case of acne for the first time, which did not go too well. Remember how I was worried about what people thought about me? So it kind of went up and down as I was battling through cancer, because I did have people who took pity on me from time to time, and it kind of sucked because you're just, oh no, look at him, what a waste, what a poor guy, and it kind of brought me down. But then again, there were and be like, I love you so much. But definitely the most painful for me was when I was very excited to see my friends, and after so many weeks, we would walk in to go in and say hi, and they would just have this look of disgust, confusion, and then I had 1 or 2 people say, "Who cares? It's just a part of life." And like many things, when like I figured I was bad. Even though I told myself I was going to live, that wasn't the hard part of the journey. Uh, it came with cost. What was I talking about? Okay, so I really wanted to finish camp. I really wanted to continue with IB in school, and I almost didn't graduate high school because of how my body was slowly starting to shut down, including my brain. I developed something which is well known, and it's called chemo brain. Basically, after such a high amount of chemotherapy through your spine, um, it damages the brain cells, and basically I don't have as good of a memory anymore, and it's really hard to remember things. That's why I need extra time in tests. I'm usually the last one to finish. And yeah, and it's still with me today, and they say it's gonna stick with me. But let me get back to that in a bit. So something I learned is that weakness is being a part. Weakness is being part of human. If that makes sense, it's part of being human. There we go. You can't have the strength without any weakness. Weakness is the backbone of your strength. But the first step in overcoming it is your attitude. So, with weakness as the backbone, I gained more strength to fight cancer and win. They told me to take a year off of school, and despite having to drive 1 hour 30 minutes every day for chemo, and having a tutor, having to do online classes over the summer, not being able to do much of fun stuff, I stayed in the race and graduated with my friends. They told me to quit cadets, but I stuck through the pain and continued my training, even receiving a few awards, and most importantly, impacting the cadets that I taught, who were very dear to me. And despite becoming the last one to finish tests, despite having to study with more time and effort compared to all my peers, here I am now in my 3rd year of marine bio at Dalhousie. So kind of in conclusion, you too will go through many weaknesses in life where you feel like you're losing control, losing the grip of life itself. But the most important thing is that you remember that it starts with your attitude. Stand strong, get back up, and know that weakness is what's going to build you into a stronger version of yourself. And once you overcome it, it won't stand in your way again. But you can't do it alone as well. Don't bear the burden all by yourself, which is why I always like this verse that's found in the Bible, Ecclesiastes 4:10. Two are better than one because they have good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. So you see, I couldn't keep hiding my pain. I had to get support to get through it, and my church family was the first to do that. And then my cadet corps, the nurses, my closest friends. Before I said I hated being pitied on, but this was different because they weren't mourning for me. They were encouraging me. They knew I could make it out, and they knew I could become a stronger person out of that. And it did encourage me to press on days after having a big needle shoved up my spine and having a few of the student nurses make a few mistakes and hit a few nerves, I had to leave hospital in a wheelchair. You know what? The only thing that kept me going is knowing that I would get to see my support group, my cadets, the church later in the evening. And that's one of the things I love about PHIdel too, because in PHIdel, there are many in PHIdel that I can just unload my weaknesses, unload my problems, and they can help me through it. They can help me bear the burden. An example of this is first year of university, I was admitted to hospital and the doctors were thinking that it was going to be a relapse to cancer. So immediately I called my big, who is Tesla Matamolu, and he came over. I didn't tell anybody I had cancer before, and I just told him everything, and he was able to help me through that, to let a few of the brothers know and like let them know they're thinking of me, and if there's anything they can do for me, they can do so. And that's one of the reasons why I'm still part of PHIdel today. So with COVID going on and everything else going on in the world, you may feel weak, like your life has changed for the worse. Just know that this is a chapter in your life for growth, the growth for strength, and that in no time you'll gain so much strength from all your lessons of failures and weaknesses. Like now in my third year, I still got weaknesses and I'm trying to overcome it. But man, I'm excited to see the type of person I will become once I have overcome them. And that is the sort of short version of my story. Thank you for listening.
Very touching and personal story indeed. Thank you very much for sharing that. And next up, we have Donald with his presentation on building Canada.
Sure. So I was starting to say, Tyler, what you talked about at the beginning about believing in yourself resonated with me. I've told my 3 children who are 17, 19, and 21 that they can do anything if they believe in themselves, try hard, and they're not afraid to fail. And those are the kinds of things that we as PHIs have always believed in. On the threshold, the first step is the hardest one to take. I came out to Vancouver in 1987 for a 1-month summer job. I worked for a mining exploration consulting firm for 6 years. They wouldn't let me buy in to become a partner. So I left it and took my first company public when I was 29. I didn't know anything about finance. I had a degree in political science from Dal. And the hardest part of it was taking that first step. And once I made the commitment to go and list the company, through conversations, I was able to do my first IPO and raise $360,000 in 1992. And since then, I've probably raised about $3 billion for clean energy projects, for mining projects, and a variety of other things. I've gotten to work all around the world in Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico, the United States, Canada, Chile, Peru, Norway, Sweden, and we built a mine for 300 million US in Burkina Faso, which is a West African country. I wanted to share with you, so that's sort of for background. One of the things that I find every day is the world is incredibly small. I was at a meeting with an Indian chief and his advisors in Vancouver one day, And at the end of the meeting, this guy named Ranj Pillai came up to me and said, "Are you Donald McInnes from Dalhousie?" Yes. Well, it turns out it was Brother Pillai, who was from Cape Breton, and he's now the Deputy Premier of the Yukon. But at the time, he was just starting off as the administrator for the Champagne-Asiatic Nation. So two things I wanted to share with you today, and I can go on and on and on, and I'm going to try to be brief, brothers. But one is just about natural resource development in Canada. And I don't know what everybody is taking in school, but I've had the pleasure of working all across the country. And it's harder and harder and harder to get things done in Canada through a very long, convoluted permitting process that frequently is hijacked by lawyers for NGOs and Aboriginal people who are using the permitting process as a place of leverage. And the story to tell you about why this is occurring, and there's 1 million Canadians that are living a third world or fourth world existence, and that's the Indigenous people of Canada. And I think it's instructive, and when I talk about this in natural resource development, to explain to people why this is happening, it's very easy if you look at it simplistically like this. Traditionally, where Aboriginal people have lived, a logging company would start and they'd build a road that might go past a community or a reserve, and that would create dust, it would create noise, and the logging would decimate the forest close to the reserve or the community. And that would literally be the breadbasket for the community. And I've seen this hundreds of times. And it means for the Aboriginal people that still live off the land, which many of them do, the animals are going farther and farther away. So it's harder and harder for them to live their traditional lives. And then over time, maybe a mine is found, more trucks. And every time a truck goes by the community knows that there's jobs, that there's wealth leaving their area, and it's negatively impacting them. All Aboriginal Canada wants, in my experience, is an opportunity to participate in natural resources. I've never met an Aboriginal leader that has said, we don't want a better future for our children. And I have built over 300 megawatts of hydroelectric assets. I've built a 50 megawatt solar farm. I've built British Columbia's largest wind farm. And we ended up with 15 agreements with 9 First Nations that allowed us to build a 155 kilometer long power line to connect to the grid for the project. And all of them are better off for the experience because we were very inclusive from the beginning. And the other thing to leave you with about natural resource development today is a lot of NGOs are against natural resources, and they're pushing and pushing and pushing for a cleaner Canada. And many of them do not understand what is going on globally. And there's a lot of hardcore NGOs that are really trying to stop oil and gas development out here in the West. And what's going to end up happening is one of two things. If they are successful in shutting down the oil sands, the winner from that will be state-owned enterprises like Gazprom in Russia, like CNOOC in China, and many of the other big global state-owned companies. And the loser is going to be Canada, because each of you in your lifetime, you're going to consume over 4.3 million tons of raw materials in your lifetime. And there's a saying in the mining industry, if it's not grown, it's mined. Everything you do, everything you consume, your microphones, your phones, all these things come from raw materials that are processed from the earth. So if we're not doing it in Canada, it's going to happen somewhere. And what drives me crazy as a proud Canadian is that we're driving more and more resource development out of Canada. And it's not, the activity of resource development is not occurring in our country, where we have the highest levels of environmental protection, where we have the highest laws that govern the activity, and where in mining it's $100,000 a year is the average job in that industry, and we're exporting all of that wealth creation process. And that is not a great thing. We have the best rules and regulations in the world. The majority of our power is coming from hydroelectric, which is clean. We have a rule of law. We're a quite inclusive country, and all of us enjoy a tremendous quality of life that's paid for in large part from our natural resources. and yet we can't seem to be shutting those industries down fast enough in our country. It takes on average 20 months, almost 2 years longer to permit a pipeline in Canada than it does in the United States, which to me is an absolute travesty. A lot of people in the West were against the development of a new hydroelectric dam in northern British Columbia called Site C, and it meant building a dam and flooding a valley. And a lot of people were against that. And so I said to people provocatively, okay, if you don't want the dam, what do you want? Because if you want wind, instead of one dam, you're asking for 5,000 windmills. So where do you want those 5,000 windmills to be placed? And if you don't like windmills and we want to do small hydro, you're going to need over 200 small hydro projects. Where do you want those placed? California went all in on renewables, and now there's rolling blackouts throughout that state constantly because there's no reliable power system there. And to me, we are being very short-sighted in how we are thinking about land use and the impact decisions that we make every day. So I would like you to think about celebrating natural resources and be proud of our heritage, and let's use technology to do a better job to increasingly get a smaller footprint from natural resource extraction. And let's try to revert to some kind of good permitting process. Right now, there's nothing wrong with the science around natural resource development. It's all about public policy and perceptions as to whether it's a good process or not. The amount of documentation for a small project runs into the tens of thousands of pages now, and most of it is never going to change the impact from something. The last thing I'll leave you with is voting matters, and I think you guys all take your civic responsibility and opportunity seriously. At one point, I was spending $800 a month on tuition for my kids at dance schools. For the boys, it was hip hop, and for my daughter, jazz, ballet, and all that kind of stuff. And there was a provincial election coming, and I said to the owner of the dance studio, so are you involved in the election? You think about what you're doing? And he said, no, we're too busy running our dance school. And I said to the guy running it, Dylan, you know, you should think about that, because all my money that I'm spending here every month, it's discretionary spending. And if the Green Party, for example, were to get elected in British Columbia and push resource development out, I'm not going to be able to make a living here anymore, which means you're going to lose my $800 a month of income that pays you and your teachers. And over 40 families rely on natural resources for their livelihood that we're keeping this dance school in urban Vancouver going. So think about unintended consequences, stay active, think openly, think broadly, and you belong to a wonderful fraternity. You never know where you're going to find brothers around the world. And I've had a great experience working with Ranj, brother Pillai, who's now the deputy premier in the Yukon. We're working on a mining project together, and we're working on a hydroelectric project that'll probably meet 25% of the Yukon's power needs. So you never know where you're going to find an ally or a friend, and keep mentorship in mind. I love talking to young people about what I've learned and how I can share and teach, because it's a lot easier to learn from history than forget about it and make the same mistakes. Tyler, thank you for reaching out and offering me the chance to talk to you guys, and I'm happy to take questions or just leave it at that, and we can engage later.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sorry, my video audio stuff wasn't working properly.
No worries, man. All right. I think we're going to save questions till the end, if that's okay. Unless anyone, yeah. In that case, Manny, you're up next.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. So mine doesn't exactly have a title, but it's something I feel like is still overall important. And this is just gonna be me airing out my dirty laundry from like who I was way back. So on around August 11th, 2017, hundreds of far-right neo-Nazi and white supremacists took to the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, in what was called the Unite the Right rally. Over the week following it, I was exposed to various YouTubers, alternative media outlets, and people like that, trying to either minimize the impact of the event or to distance themselves from it. And like overall, I personally didn't think it was that big a deal at the time. My personal journey into becoming what I would now consider like a far right radical started in one of the most like unlikeliest of places. It was in the YouTube atheism community. And this is because my first exposure to atheist content was from YouTubers who debunked a lot of abusive narratives I'd been brought up with and things that I had been taught from like a really young age. So I really latched on to their opinions and like their point of views. But then something happened that like I think around 2014 that kind of changed the name of the game, and that was Gamergate. It kind of started out as like ethics in games journalism because a game developer slept with like a reviewer, I think, for a better score. But it became like it very quickly grew into like a way for an audience who didn't really like a certain kind of people to go out and attack the people who they thought were destroying their way of life and like, things that they valued. Now, from what I've been told since, that split kind of created another side to the atheist community of like more inclusive, more intersectional thought leaders, like people who breathe the values of feminism, of like how harmful ableism can be, but I was not exposed to any of their content for the longest time. And the people I watched at the time wouldn't necessarily call themselves far right, but through some of the ideals that they preached to some of their videos, like debunking BuzzFeed articles at the time, because BuzzFeed had found its niche in like inflammatory feminist content and like did its best to just provoke um, people talking about it, try to get their name out. But the YouTubers I watch in sharing those views found themselves sort of tacitly endorsing views of more far right YouTubers, such as like Dennis Prager, Paul Joseph Watson, Sargon of Akkad, Jordan Peterson, and more recently famously Ben Shapiro. This is really hard for me to admit, but at one point I considered Ben Shapiro a very trusted resource, which is it's now the most embarrassing thing to just say out loud. But yeah, that's just the kind of person I was when I graduated from high school, because like I was really just a parrot to some of the worst ideas that like came out of that corner of the internet. Like I came out believing a lot of really horrible things. Like I was, now that I look back on it, I was probably 2 steps away from believing in the Great Replacement, which, if anyone here is not familiar with, it is this idea that really grew traction in alt-right circles around 2016 um when the fear of refugees and immigrants was really at its peak for European countries, and a lot of people felt that there was a risk of European countries European countries taking in too many refugees and making them citizens, so that within like a generation or two, they would essentially be bred out of the population. And like it is very like outlandish and weird to think about now, but I would like that just goes to show how far gone I was at the time. And the first step to really getting out of that was to meet new people who challenged the ways I thought about things, people who were essentially like not from that corner of the internet, people who didn't like see uh, the new Ghostbusters movie as the worst thing to come to man. Like people who had a wider range of opinions, and Fight Out was honestly a really big part of that growth because it really like the people I met, the brothers in Fight Out that I met, and the people I met through Fight Out really helped me to reevaluate the kind of person I was becoming and the kind of things that I held stock in. And like the brothers I met as I came through, and more particularly the the strangers I became Phaikaya with. That's Blake, Dex, Kyle, Raheem, Owen, and Ben. They can all probably attest that I was like kind of a dumbass in my first year, like just a little bit. But that exposure really got me to like think about who I was, think about like, who I was becoming, and I feel like that is one of the most important parts of adult, and one of the most important parts of like finding yourself a new community. And yeah, I really believe that it can help others through like that journey as well, because maybe someone's coming from like a different sorry, maybe someone's coming from a different way of thinking about things, but they just haven't been exposed to that many things or to that many people. And like I still feel like Fight Out would be a very important um I guess way of branching out. Yeah. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I can answer any questions or anything that anyone's curious about. But yeah.
All right, thank you for presenting. And last up, we've got Aidan McKenzie with his talk on perfectionism and ADHD.
Hey guys, is my audio decent? Can you guys hear me pretty well?
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. How do I share my screen? It says that the host disabled it. Oh, there we go. I am good to go. Perfect. Everyone can see this just fine?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. Cool. So my presentation is on perfectionism and ADHD, and my journey to write this speech. This presentation didn't start off being about this speech, but as I'll get into a little bit later, my process for creating this, I think is a pretty good example of how perfectionism and ADHD kind of intersect. There is a red line on my screen. I don't know if that can be gotten rid of. I don't know if someone wrote on it. There we go, look at that. So first of all, what is perfectionism? And it's, for a lot of people, they think it's just this idea of wanting to do things really, really well and wanting to do everything perfectly. But it's a little bit more than that, in that it's not just the need to be perfect when you're doing a task, but it's the need to appear perfect. A lot about professionalism isn't necessarily about actually wanting to accomplish a task perfectly, but wanting the world around you to see you as competent and wanting everyone around you to see that you did an absolutely perfect job doing whatever that task is. So what is ADHD? The reason I wanted to bring this up, because a lot of people think they understand ADHD, and I also thought I understood it up until I actually got diagnosed with ADHD. And then as I looked into it, found YouTube channels that talked in a little more depth about the personal experience with ADHD, read a lot of articles, talked to some professionals about it. I now have a better understanding of what it actually means. Because for most people, they seem to think it is just hyperactivity and you can't pay attention. But there's a lot more to it than that. And there's a really common misconception that ADHD isn't real, that it's this imaginary thing that therapists diagnose people with for being too hyper. They get pills in school and then they stop talking as much, and kids will be kids, and kids are always hyper, so ADHD is this harmful thing, whatever. But in reality, there is a lot of science behind it. It's not just this section of characteristics like a lot of people think. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it's characterized by two main kind of issues. One is a lack of dopamine transmitters, and another is your executive function skills. And these present themselves in the symptoms of being inattentive, having a lack of motivation and follow through, memory issues, amongst a lot of other things, such as scheduling, and the ability to focus. Like right now, I just lost my train of thought midway through that sentence. So ADHD and dopamine transmitters. Dopamine is a hormone in your brain, and one of its functions is task completion. So for people to start and continue a task, you need to hit a threshold of dopamine in your brain. So for most people, the idea that you have an essay due in a week is enough to motivate you to keep going, because your dopamine hits that threshold where you're like, okay, this is important enough for me to do it. I care about this enough for me to do it. People with ADHD, the actual transmitters that bring dopamine to the areas of your brain that you need to complete a task are lacking. There's not as many of them as neurotypical people have. So that presents itself by having an inability to start tasks until you hit this much higher level, this much higher threshold for dopamine, which is why you see people who don't have ADHD taking Adderall get a lot of physical and mental effects out of it, whereas when people with ADHD take it, it actually calms them down and brings them down to a lower level. So ADHD and executive function. Executive function is the process that controls everything from scheduling, planning, short-term memory, self-regulation, which is like self-control, impulse control, starting a task, and task completion. So when your executive function, the way I like to think about it is there's a little office manager inside your brain. And most people have a moderately efficient office manager who does all the scheduling, the planning, short-term memory, all of those things. They do a pretty good job of keeping it all under control. Whereas for me, my office manager is really, really, really bad at their job. And not only that, but they call in sick on a lot of days, which makes things like starting and completing tasks really, really difficult for me, like physically something that can feel impossible to do. And it's not just laziness, it's my brain not getting the hormones it requires to actually be able to do the normal functions that a lot of people are able to do just naturally, which is, I think, a big reason why there's this idea that that ADHD isn't real, because people are like, oh, I lose my keys a lot. I'm a little ADHD sometimes. When in reality, it's something that really impacts your life and happens consistently all the time. Everyone loses their keys sometimes. For me, I search my house top to bottom for my keys every single time I leave my house. And people are like, oh, put it in the same spot every time. But my short-term memory, my working memory is really, really bad. So when I'm putting my keys down, I don't think about putting it in the same spot every time. So how does perfectionism fit into this idea of neurodiversity? So let's take a task like doing laundry. For a neurotypical brain, the task is doing your laundry. That's how you view it. You think, okay, I've got to do laundry today. I should do that now. Grab your laundry and you do it. For an ADHD neurodivergent brain, this is what doing laundry is to me. Each one of these steps is something that feels like an individual task. And I think about it all from the beginning to end, regardless of if one of those things happens in 2 hours from now. And if I think right now, in 2 hours, I am going to be unable to fold and put my laundry away, that can be a barrier that will stop me. So I've got to stand up, grab my clothes from the floor, put the clothes in a bag, leave my house, walk to the laundry building a couple houses over, put my clothes in the washer, wait for those clothes to finish, put my clothes in the dryer. When they're done, put it in a bag again, bring that bag home, fold the laundry, put the laundry away. So for task completion, people with ADHD have something that I like to call the wall. So this wall is the barrier along that path. If you look at like a circuit, for example, like Christmas lights, if one bulb goes out, the whole chain goes out. So with task completion, the idea that one of those tasks is the one that my brain is not letting me do right now, doesn't matter if that's at the very end, that kills the whole chain. So for me, a lot of the time, it's folding my laundry. So I think waited for 3 weeks between doing laundry. I had one shirt left by the time I finally actually got up and did my laundry. Which, keep in mind, when I say laundry building, it's like 2 doors away from me. But that idea of folding the laundry and putting it away, that was my wall that I had to get past to be able to do all of these things. And there's a lot of ways to get past the wall by breaking it into baby steps, breaking right through that wall, getting angry and being like, I need to do laundry right now. Like, I'm so stupid and lazy, which is how a lot of people tend to approach the wall, by trying to run straight through it. But a lot of times you bounce off when you try and break through the wall. So this ties into perfectionism in a lot of ways, because if you take a more complex task, like writing an essay, I know that I want to do the absolute best job possible to get the absolute best grade possible. And then when I start thinking about the idea of starting that essay, for me, and for a lot of people with ADHD, I start thinking about all the steps, all the things that I'm really bad at, especially writing is a weak spot for most people with ADHD. And then I end up not starting it for a while. Not just because I don't hit that dopamine threshold of urgency, which is a part of it, but also the idea that, like, I'm going to mess up writing my conclusion because I'm really bad at writing conclusions. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to struggle with writing this conclusion right now. And my body basically shuts down and goes, watch a YouTube video, forget about it. We can start this tomorrow. So this speech right now, Tyler asked me a week ago if I'd started it. I lied and said yes. Tyler asked me if I had a title for it a couple days ago. I did not. I took a quick look at the list of potential topics that were suggested. And I went, I don't have a title, but it's about perfectionism. I was like, I will figure out what about perfectionism I'm going to be talking about in a little bit. It's fine. I'll do it tomorrow, whatever. So 1 p.m. is when I had actually, 1 p.m. today was when I actually started preparing this PowerPoint, and preparing what I wanted to talk about. So that was maybe 6.5 hours ago. 5 p.m. is when I realized I hated everything about what I was starting to write about, and I completely restarted. So that was an hour before I was supposed to be on this call. I didn't know if I was going to be up first. I knew I had to have this done before the call started. 5 p.m. is when I switched to writing about specifically just ADHD, because originally I wanted to talk about a variety of neurodiverse conditions and different brain types, and the way perfectionism affects each of them individually. And then I realized when I was writing a piece about autism for this, like, I don't have that much personal experience with autism. I can do the research. I understand that there are a lot of implications with perfectionism and autism, but I'm like, I don't understand enough about this to confidently talk about this topic. So 5 p.m., completely restructure this. 5:42 is when I got to this point in the presentation. That's 3 minutes before I'm supposed to be joining a call 15 minutes early to be able to start this presentation. And 5:55 is when I actually joined the call. And I wanted to absolutely nail this presentation, especially it being something that I actually really wanted to talk about, something that I think a lot of people overlook because of a lot of misconceptions around a lot of neurodiversity. So that idea that I wanted to really nail this, I spent so long hitting blocks and walls in that 4-hour period before I switched topics. In the days leading up to this, when I started thinking about this, wanting to get it right so bad, put up a huge barrier for me for actually starting it. So I'm like, you know what? I'm in a really bad mood right now. I'm not feeling productive. If I start this now, I'm going to do a bad job. So I waited until today. And these ideas of perfectionism and the way it impacts people with ADHD brings out a lot of really negative words and negative feelings for people. When you try and run at that wall and break it down, instead of trying to climb that wall, instead of trying to put up handholds to make it easier in the future, you get hurt when you bounce off the wall. So a lot of times when I'm not accomplishing these tasks, when I'm not doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing, especially in a setting like PHIdelt where I really want to be able to help out my brothers and really want to do a good job, these ideas that I'm lazy, I'm stupid, I'm flaky, that I don't care about any of this, not because I genuinely don't care, but for a lot of people, me being kind of flaky and seeming to be lazy makes it seem like I don't care about the things that I'm a part of. But I care about PHIdelt a lot. But these walls that get put up for me put this outside perspective that I don't care. And the biggest one that I've heard from a lot of people with ADHD is this idea of being a waste of potential. I was really good at school in high school because everything I was doing in high school, I'm like not trying to flex or brag or anything, but I naturally understood a lot of things in high school. I'm a moderately smart person. So it came to me really easy. And then I came to university and things stopped being so easy for me. And I didn't have the knowledge and the ideas in place to be able to operate at that higher level in university. So that made me feel like I was a waste of potential, spending my whole life being a relatively intelligent person who had school come pretty easy to me. Getting to university and struggling like that made me feel like I could be so much more than this, but I'm so lazy that I'm just wasting all of my potential. And these ideas and the hit to the self-esteem that a lot of neurodiverse folks take day to day with task completion, and especially in regards to perfectionism, leads to a lot of really negative outcomes. People with ADHD are 5 times more likely to get diagnosed with depression. They're 4 times more likely to get diagnosed with anxiety. And that's because the world isn't set up for people with ADHD. And the way society puts a lot of pressure on for productivity and perfection really pushes down a lot of neurodiverse folks. So the way around that, I think, is this idea of reframing the culture of perfectionism. And it's slowly something people are starting to talk about, where they're like, okay, being a perfectionist isn't actually a good thing. There's a lot of negatives that come with being a perfectionist. But overall, across society, wanting to be perfect, wanting to be productive, wanting to be the next Bill Gates, wanting to reach all these higher and higher levels, not being okay with settling. These all feed into this idea of perfectionism that puts up a lot of barriers for a lot of people, but in particular, the impacts of those barriers can really push down people who have ADHD and other conditions like that. So thinking about things less as wanting to do everything perfectly and more about just wanting to get it done and do a good enough job and wanting to do the best job that you are capable of doing at the time. That's how, in my eyes, we can reframe this culture of perfectionism. And I left this as the final slide because I want to hear from you guys, and I want you guys to start thinking about how, not in Fidel, not at your workplace, but in general, at all the organizations you're a part of, how can you have a hand in reframing this culture of perfectionism? How can you start to come up with ideas to make this less of an issue for people and make this less of a crushing weight for folks? And this impacts people well beyond those with ADHD. But being someone who has ADHD, I know the specific impacts it's had on me. And I just wanted to give that perspective that a lot of people don't tend to get, because ADHD really isn't that widely talked about. Beyond just how many diagnoses there are. The specifics of ADHD, how it works, how it impacts individuals, really isn't something that is talked about all that often. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys got something out of it.
Thank you again for a great presentation. And thank you everyone who came out tonight. This was fun. I'm glad I really enjoyed hearing from everyone, and I hope everyone shares that sentiment.